Hello, everybody. This is our fourth episode, and today we're going to do a really special episode that we didn't expect to be doing on Adolescence, the Netflix series Adolescence. Now, listen, if you haven't seen this series, I would probably suggest watching it before you listen to this because there will be some spoiler alerts. Both Elliot and I have watched it. I know lots and lots of people have watched it, and it's been talked about all over the place, but we really wanted to look at the themes of this series, to talk about how it made us feel and what we were worried about and what we took from the series, but also to talk to some experts. So we've got a child psychologist coming up. We've got an expert in online safety for kids, and we're going to talk to a parent whose son accessed some harmful content online and what happened. But firstly, Elliot, I really want to know what you thought about the series. What were the key things that you took from Adolescence?
I feel like we all need to take a collective breath. I don't think I've ever seen a short series program capture the nation quite like Adolescence has. And for me, it's really important. It was a hard, tough watch. It's very raw. It's very emotional. But I think it's necessary because it has finally platformed some issues that have been bubbling. People have been talking about for years. It's an essential watch. If you haven't watched it yet, what are you doing? Go and watch it now. Like, pause the podcast, go and watch it now, because you need to watch this program, regardless of whether you are a parent to a boy or not.
If you're feeling raw and low, maybe just leave it 24 hours and then watch it, because brace yourself.
What were your raw feelings after you finished? Talk us through your journey, Joeli, of consuming Adolescence.
So the first episode, when I'd finished, my partner said, "I'm not watching anymore. This is trauma porn." And I got what he was saying because I cried all the way through it. And at the end of it, I just felt hollow. We obviously have two boys. And so as it's about a boy, it feels very personal and very raw. I didn't feel like that after the other episodes, and we obviously persevered and got through the rest of them. And with each episode, I felt like they took things from a slightly different angle. So you could look at things in the round, which I thought was really helpful. One of the key things for me that I just took from almost every episode was that there were men. The majority of characters are men. It's written by a man, it's produced by a man, but it's essentially about violence against women and girls. And I loved that about it, because finally it felt like we've got something here that's huge, and it's men talking about this issue, and it's not women driving the narrative. That to me felt like a real moment to celebrate. But of course, by the end of it, I felt deflated and hopeless, if I'm honest. And I'm not sure that is helpful.
Do you think it's on purpose? Do you think they wanted you to feel like that at the end?
I feel like they're asking a big question and they don't know the answer. And they want to say that they don't want to lay the blame at anybody's door, which I really like about it as well. They're saying this is a problem. We all need to be involved in the solution. We don't know what the answers are. And so inevitably it's going to leave you feeling a bit confused and hopeless, because you want solutions, right? You want to go, right, that's what we need to do. Or, oh, okay, no, this is all going to work out in the end. And neither of those things are the case.
I quite liked the fact that they didn't give us solutions. I quite like the fact there wasn't and now do ABC and you will fix the problem. It wasn't the Hollywood, here you go, ending. This is how you fix the problem in your own life. It was, we need to, as a society, have a really important conversation that we haven't been having. And how do we hit you with the most powerful narrative and display of that to leave you thinking, shit, I need to learn more. The important thing is where people then go to learn more. I hope our podcast is part of helping people to find some healthy solutions. I also want to shout out some of the incredible organizations that have been doing this work for years. Beyond Equality, Dan Guinness, Future Men, who are future guests on the podcast, Alex Holmes, Father to Father, Courtney Brown. There are so many, the Men and Boys Coalition. And I think for anyone listening, if you are thinking about where to go, there are people out here that have been working with boys on the ground. And I hope that off the back of this program, those companies get more support. Yeah. And people go to them to find out, okay, what can I do and what's going on the ground in my local area as well.
Yeah, here. And of course, Movember. We love and are doing great work in this space. My friend Christine Armstrong sent me a message actually last night about Adolescence, and I'd love to read it out. She said, "For me, the point is in the questions it raises. How do we raise our kids in a world where strangers can communicate with them without our knowledge? We can knock on the doors, but we can't force them to answer. We don't even understand half of how they communicate. You know, you see on the program the emojis that they're using, and none of the adults have a clue what any of them mean. I didn't have a clue what any of them meant. How do we keep kids safe and protect them? What does that even look like? How do we know if we're doing it? How does trauma pass between generations, and how do we break that connection? How do we balance the needs to make a living and provide for the needs of our kids without causing harm? So like the dad says on there that he gave a PC to his son because he wanted his son to have something that he didn't have. Who is responsible when kids do struggle? Is it the parents or school or social media? Who can even influence this mix? How do we respond when things go wrong? The boy is a child. He has a bear in his bed and he is a confused victim too. But if it was my child that he hurt, I wouldn't feel that. I would feel no sympathy for him whatsoever. So what is the correct response? So there's so many questions that this leverages and so few answers.
Well done, Christine. First of all, that was poetic. Thank you, Christine. There are so many questions, and I think that's not a bad thing. You know, I think it's the reality. So us having some grasp of the questions we should be asking ourselves is a really good thing. And throughout the program, there's a little things that stood out to me so much that I think I really want to reflect on. And obviously the overall storyline and the fact that we saw this from the perpetrator's perspective. You know, I think we've seen programs from the victim's perspective, and they're really good, and we need more of those. But they were really brave in telling the story from the perspective of the boy. And that last scene around what happens when this happens, how do the family pick themselves up? How does it impact everybody else? And that scene at the end when Stephen Graham's crying into the pillow, and I'm getting goosebumps now even thinking about it. He's crying into the pillow and he's thinking about what he has or hasn't done, how he's contributed. He's thinking about how his daughter's going to go to school. His daughter said, "I'm known as Jamie's sister now." He's thinking about his work, his plumbing business. He's thinking about his wife. He's thinking about his community, how he is able to keep this together. Now being the dad of a boy that has killed someone at 13 years old. And it was some of the most powerful TV I've ever seen. A couple of points that I think I saw that really stood out to me. There was the scene in the school, the chaotic school. And for anyone that is thinking about secondary schools for their children, I'm sure this is like, it really stressed you out.
Yeah.
But just a real representation of how the school and the education system is quite broken, and how those teachers were overworked. We teachers are underpaid. They are stressed out. They can't control the kids. Discipline is on the floor. And those scenes where the teachers, there was one teacher particularly who was struggling to hold the class, but the other teachers, the male teachers who were shouting at the kids, you know, spending most of their time trying to control the kids rather than teach them.
Yeah.
And you think about the environment that we're sending our kids to, like, what does that do for them, and how does that not protect them against all the other negative influences that we're seeing online and through the world? I think the education system doesn't help at all. There was also a scene when the lead detectives went into the school to talk about the murder weapon, and as they were kind of trying to address the class, the kids were just laughing, and it really just showed the desensitization of violence. And through gaming, through what we've seen online, social media, YouTube, just murder, killing, you know, it's so desensitized.
Yeah. And that you're absolutely right. I hadn't fully picked up on that, but now that you say it, when Jamie is in with the psychologist in the room, and the psychologist has to keep saying to him, "You know, she's dead. She's not coming back to life. She is dead," as if he really hasn't computed that. He hasn't processed that him stabbing her means she is dead and she's gone forever. You're right, this desensitization to violence, and this notion that perhaps a hark to gaming, that in games you kill people and things, it's not real. Like, is that plaguing and messing with our kids' brains? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I think it is. I think the writing was so clever. I think it was all on purpose. You know, all these little things, I think they just put in there as little kind of, these are things around the edges, you know, that very much play into the outcome. Episode 3, I've watched it 3 times when Jamie's sitting down and being interviewed by the psychologist. Erin Doherty, I think her name is, incredible actor. And there was one moment that struck me actually, when she went out into the control room and the security guard was there.
Oh, yeah.
And she was watching the video and he's like in her ear. just
Yeah.
whispering and being really creepy.
Oh, he was awful.
It was really creepy.
Yeah.
And I think they put that in there to show, look, these little incidents of like sexism, misogyny, I guess what women have to face in the workplace and in life. And it made me feel really uncomfortable because like, why was he standing so close? Why was he whispering in her ear? She's a professional. She's doing her job. And it was
Yeah.
his entitlement to her personal space and her professional thinking time that that really stood out to me as a kind of, they put that in there to show, yes, there's this big story, but there's these little things that happen like every single day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and any woman watching that has had that experience, that exact experience, where they're not doing anything that you can quite put your finger on that is wrong, but they make you feel so uncomfortable and make you just want to crawl out of your own skin by standing too close, by looking at you in a way that they want you to take your clothes off. There's just something not quite right about that situation, and they portrayed that beautifully.
They did. What was interesting about Jamie's character, at the beginning, I thought, oh, he couldn't have done it because he's 13, right? And he's quite a small, skinny kid, right? So you're thinking he's not
Yeah,
capable.
he's a cherubic, like beautiful boy. They've done that on purpose,
They
haven't
have.
they, as well?
So you're thinking it's not possible, but then you get to the interview and you see the complex nature of, this is a boy who thinks he's ugly, who is being bullied at school, who feels like he doesn't live up to his dad's expectations in sport and football, and that scene around him being in goal and the dad kind of turning away from him. But then he's so quick to anger and intimidate the psychologist.
Hmm.
And I thought that was terrifying, revealing that people can be complicated. And yes, you can look innocent, but still be capable of horrific crimes.
Yeah, because as well as the anger in that room, you feel his fear as well. He's so scared. He's a scared little boy who uses anger to deflect from his fear. That was what I was seeing when he's in the room with the psychologist, but I also felt for the psychologist and what that would feel like as a woman in that room with a 13-year-old boy shouting in your face who has committed this heinous crime. I mean, I was really fascinated by how the mother was essentially left out of it for most of it. I mean, obviously she was in it a bit more at the end, but it was very focused on the role of the dad in all of this. And I liked that as well, because often the mother is the one that's blamed, and often in the right-wing media. I remember seeing a headline of them talking about mass murderers and what their mums were like. Like they did a whole article on it in the Daily Mail, and as if, must be the mother's fault. It's always the mother's fault. And they very much steered away from that narrative. And they did talk quite a lot about the dad's anger. And although the dad had never harmed anybody, he clearly had a lot of anger issues, and he still was very lovable, but he also had this switch that he could turn to anger quite quickly. He dismantled the shed, didn't he, one time when he was furious, which I loved. And so there's, that really complicated conversation about male anger was done very well.
It was. And I think there's a scene on the way back from the DIY shop when Jamie says he's going to change his plea, and the conversation he has with his mum and sister, and how he kind of doesn't really want to speak to them, kind of like dismisses them. And it just showed me how he's so keen for his dad's approval. And maybe that dismissiveness of the conversation with his mum and sister was a bigger reflection of his lack of respect for women, and how actually the male approval is what he is really seeking. But I felt like the dad at the end, when he spoke about work getting in the way, his business took off, he left the house at 6, got back at 8, and he says, maybe I took my eye off the ball. That really hit home, because, we know the importance of good male role models, and not just having a good dad, but a good dad that's actually present in the house. And going back to this idea about masculinity that we provide, and we're out working all the time. And I thought that was so important to include, because providing is one thing, but what are we providing for if we're not around? Not saying we can be around every evening, right? But if we're not around a substantive amount of time to spend time with our kids and get to know them, and them get to know us, what are we providing for? And I think what they tried to do was reflect the dad's character as ultimately a good man, not a perfect man, but ultimately a man that's flawed in his own way, but not extreme, not to blame. Like he seemed like a normal guy. Like his level of anger didn't seem extreme to me. I don't think they were trying to portray him as an extreme angry man. I think they're actually trying to say this is quite a normal family, actually. And maybe what we have been doing just isn't, I don't want to say good enough, but isn't the right thing. And maybe where we can make changes to be more present, we should be able to be more present. And that's really tough to deliver and tough to hear. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at all, but I think what the program showed us is that for the dads, it's really important that we're around.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think it's the portrayal of a very normal family. But I did also pick up on the fact that the women in that family are very deferent to him. He was the boss. And he, when they talked about moving, he was like, no, we are not moving. And that was like, that's the end of the story. No more conversation about it. I think that deference to him was meant to be there to show that perhaps that also had fed into Jamie's negative feelings towards girls and women. Then the girl that he killed, she was bullying him online. And the only reaction to that he had in his toolbox was anger. And if perhaps in the home, when arguments had happened between the mum and the dad had modelled backing down or saying, I'm sorry, or giving her a hug, or there'd been that representation of a different way of handling that situation, perhaps that could have fed into Jamie's behaviour. Perhaps. I don't know whether that's what they're saying, and I don't know whether that is right, what I'm saying. I just, that I did notice the deference.
There was
towards him.
definitely a kind of how are you going to respond thing? Like, what's your emotional reaction going to be? And then from the women to the dad. And then how do we adapt our behavior around you? And
that happens a lot in
it
families,
does.
right?
It happens a lot. I've seen it in my own family and friendship groups, where that happens. And it's sad when you see it happening. I've been in households and the guy says something or someone in the room says something and the wife looks at the husband and then looks at everyone else to see their reaction before they speak, rather than I feel free to say what I want. And I think it's an important message for all the men listening to create that emotional, psychological safety in your household where people aren't scared to express their opinions or show their emotions because they're scared of how you're going to respond to them. And actually knowing that your children can say what they want to say, right? And you're not just going to get angry. They don't have to adapt their behavior because the dad's around.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I think when we're talking about what good looks like, right? Being around is half the job. But then once you are around, it's like, what does healthy look like? How do you create a healthy environment? And another thing that really stood out to me was when the mum said, at 1 a.m. Jamie will have his lights on, and I would just, say to him, Jamie got school in the morning, and he'd just turn the light off and not say anything.
Yeah.
And I thought about my own childhood and thought, my mum and dad have burst into my room like that. If I'm up at 1 a.m. on a school night, my mum and dad are not knocking on the door. They're not talking.
Though, Elliot, like I must have told you before, I have had, because my son doesn't have a phone and kids in his class do, they sometimes think I am my son. And so I get messages from kids in his class at 1 a.m. They're in their bedroom messaging each other on WhatsApp. And these are 11-year-old kids and their parents don't know. So I think that was a really clear message actually in there. One thing you can do is like not let your kids have screens in their bedroom, please. I don't want to sound like that. That sounds really judgmental. And it's really hard to monitor that because my son is desperate for a computer and a screen set up in his bedroom, and most of his friends have it. And I get why. Like, I'm not trying to be judgmental. I just think you do lose control sometimes if you don't know what they're doing. And you can't monitor them every second, but you can have boundaries.
Yeah. And for me, it kind of spoke to not wanting to upset your child, wanting to like be pally with them, not wanting to break the relationship, not wanting to have a confrontation. And I do feel like sometimes we're in that a little bit too much.
Yeah.
When actually, like, we're still their parents. Friendship will hopefully develop, over the years, but ultimately we are still their parents. And I think about my own parents, very traditional Caribbean household where my dad particularly was nice man, but very strict with education, behavior, manners and stuff like that. And that served me really, really well. And I do fear sometimes we are going completely the other way around where we're scared to put boundaries around things that we know are unhealthy for our kids, but we are so scared to upset them, and Stephen's character at one point said, my dad used to beat me when I was Jamie's age. My dad used to beat me and I turned out like this. And how did I create Jamie when I never put a hand on him. And I think that was a really interesting dynamic as well, around, I'm not talking about physical discipline here, but boundaries and how much we expect from our kids around behavior, obedience, the parent-child relationship. How much of that do we lean into, and do we maybe need to rethink how much boundaries we put around what our children do, and not be scared to go into their room at 1 a.m. when they're blatantly on the internet,
exactly.
talking to whoever.
Yeah, I think we should get your dad on the podcast as well.
He would hate this. I don't think you could pay him enough money to come on this podcast.
Would he charge us? Mr. Ray.
Yeah, he wouldn't. BBC documentary, he did that because he knew how much it meant to me, but he got noticed in the supermarket and he came to me, he's like, Elliot, someone saw me from the TV, and he hasn't forgiven me for that. So no, I wouldn't put him on this podcast.
Doesn't like to be the centre of attention. Okay, got it.
Not like me at all.
I want to talk briefly about the impact, the worry that I have about adolescence being used to create division between boys and girls. And I've seen some data. I'm not going to be able to quote the exact statistics, but in some countries, boys and girls are reporting a lot of division between the genders. And in the UK, actually, the division has not been that great. We seem to be rubbing along together quite well. There is always a danger that things like this will be taken by certain fractions of the media and used to create those divisions because that sells newspapers. And I've already seen that happening. So there was an article in the Daily Mail with the headline, "Is your son a ticking time bomb?" Like, what are we doing? No, thank you. My son is not a ticking time bomb. And by putting these headlines in the newspapers, we're telling people to be afraid of boys. We're saying, watch your sons. They need watching because they are a problem. And the internet and social media is a problem for everybody. It is not just a problem for boys. And no, my son is not a ticking time bomb. He is deserving of love and respect and care like any other child. He is just in a world that we don't understand at the moment. And so rather than us constantly putting this blame, particularly on boys, that I think has an adverse effect where it creates more division. It means boys are more likely to gravitate towards the manosphere and influencers that tell them that they are amazing because they're the ones that are picking them up rather than the media demonizing them. I think rather than this blame, we should be looking for solutions. And it really deeply concerns me about how we're going to be talking to boys and the messages that they're receiving as a result.
Like with anything, when something becomes big, it gets weaponized for people's own motivations, just clicks, and to sell newspapers, whether it is a political agenda. And I think it's just for us all to be aware, what content are we consuming? How do we critically think about what we're consuming? And as I said at the beginning, going to the organizations that are doing the work on the ground. I'm really happy this conversation has come up, but the ideas are not new. The concept, the reality is not a new one. There are people that have been doing this work for a long time. Please, let's pour into them. We can link in the show notes. Support those organizations, the ones that are trying to have a healthy conversation about this and understand the issues really, really, really well.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. What should we do now, Elliot?
I think we should speak to a parent, and we have a mum whose son has seen some content online, and we really wanted to bring this into reality. It's a hard-hitting conversation. Stay with us. This is necessary and important. Let's get into it.
So Joeli, you and your partner are two full-time busy working parents. And I know you don't have your parents close by or that village or the support nearby. How do you cope with all of this?
Well, the simple answer is we don't. We're both losing our marbles constantly. But thankfully, we did find Bubble childcare, and it's been a total game changer. We were really nervous about having a stranger come into our house, but we found Sarah. She's a primary school teacher who is doing some babysitting and nannying on the side. She came and met with us. The kids absolutely adore her. She is just brilliant. She babysat for us a couple of weeks ago, and she even made the kids their dinner. And now the kids just want us to go out all the time so that they can have Sarah. We've used her for emergency backup care. It's saved our relationship. It's saved our careers. We just love Bubble.
Find and book background checked nannies and sitters who can be with you in as little as an hour. Trusted by parents you know, like us. Search Bubble Childcare in the App Store or Google Play Store.
We're doing a special episode today on some of the themes of adolescence, looking at the impact it's having on boys and on parents. And so we have with us today a mum who has an experience of something that happened to her child that she's going to share with us. So, Sarah, if you'd like to tell us your story.
Thanks, Joeli. It was probably about this time last year, actually. My son had been playing for a couple of years since COVID with a child that lived really, really close to us. He was a little bit older than Billy, and he moved away. So Billy and the other child kept in touch by playing with each other online. They quite often played on the Xbox, or they would connect their iPad and play Roblox. Games that both me and my husband thought were age appropriate. There was one afternoon where Billy and the other boy were playing, and I was in the room next to Billy, and I always said to him, keep your door open so I can hear who you're chatting to. I was working, and I noticed that Billy cut the conversation quite short. There was a couple of raised voices, but I wasn't really listening. They quite often shouted. He's quite loud. Later on that afternoon, I didn't really think anything of it, but later on that afternoon, my husband took Billy swimming, which is a regular occurrence. And then when they came home from swimming, my husband came in, Billy was in front of him with a very sort of strange look upon his face, and my husband just sort of mouthed at me, don't say anything, I'm just going to put him in the front room and put the telly on. And then he kind of indicated that I had to go to the kitchen, and my husband talked to me and explained that on the way back from swimming, Billy had burst into tears in the car. Really unlike him, my husband had to stop the car and I asked Billy, what's the matter? And Billy told him that the other boy had told him whilst they were playing on a game, had told him all about the dark web. He had introduced him to the concept of necrophilia, and he'd also told him about sites where adults looked at naked boys, specifically said naked boys, and that they could do things to naked boys, and that he'd also seen sites where naked children were for sale for sex. And it had taken Billy the whole of the swimming session to pluck up the courage to be able to talk to my husband about it. And my husband sat in the car with him for over 40 minutes to try and get this story out of him. And as a result of that, he was just a completely changed child. It was probably one of the worst moments of our lives to understand that had happened in a conversation that probably took less than 10 minutes.
What did your husband say to Billy when that happened?
I think he went straight into problem-solving mode. Fortunately, both my husband and we have jobs where we manage people, and I think that we both sort of jumped into that sort of persona of trying to understand the problem, and spoke to him about the fact that he was really, really pleased that he'd told him. He said he'd been really brave for telling him that he knew that something had been the matter. And my husband later said to me that he could tell during the swimming session that Billy was worried about something. And the thing that broke my heart was that Billy had said to me afterwards that he was swimming and he just kept looking around thinking, I'm not safe. I've only got a really small pair of shorts on, and are there people in the swimming pool that are here because they want to buy me? And it was that really upset me. I mean, everything upset me, but that one little sentence, when I was talking to him, I had to really try really hard not to cry.
Thing that is just horrendous for all of you. And I have some insight into what that feels like, because I have had, not to the same extent, but a similar-ish experience with my eldest son. So I know how terrifying it is. And I think it's amazing that your son talked to you and your husband about it. That shows that he feels really safe to talk about what has been happening to him. What did you do next after you'd had the conversation with Billy? What did you decide would be your next actions?
Well, I think at the time we didn't really think about what we were going to do in the future. We told him that he'd been really brave. First of all, we asked him if he'd seen anything, and that was another massive concern for both of us. He said that the other boy had said that he could show him the sites, but that was when the raised voices occurred, and Billy said, no, I don't want to see anything, and just stopped the call. So I did more digging. I had loads more conversations with him to try and understand exactly what the other child had said. And then I think foolishly at the time, both my husband and I thought just having a chat with him and reassuring him that those things, we didn't lie. I've always been really mindful when Billy asks me questions. I've always tried to be as honest as I could in an age appropriate fashion, but we reassured him that he was completely safe. But the change in the behavior lasted for months and months and months. And I think it was really apparent a couple of weeks later when the day that it happened, he slept in our bed, and he hadn't done that since he was a toddler. And then he didn't want to leave our room, so he ended up sleeping in our room, actually on and off for about 6 months. So probably after about 4 weeks of him still sleeping in our room, I said to my husband, I feel like we need to do something else. So I went to talk to the school, because there was one morning where I had to sit in the car with Billy for about an hour to try and get him to go to school. And that's when he was saying things like he didn't want to be here. He felt it was his fault. He felt he shouldn't have had that conversation with the other boy. I think he was just replaying the instance and the situation over and over and over in his mind.
Oh my goodness. I just can't imagine how traumatic that was for all of you. You said he stayed in the same bed as you for 6 months. Do you think he's better, for want of a better word? Do you think he's managed to process it? Do you think he's managed to be able to put it in a box so that he can move forward in a healthy way? Or do you think it's still there and it's always going to plague him?
I think it took a very, very long time. And I think looking back, I don't think it was until after he had the summer break from school that he started to almost come back to his normal self. We were fortunate enough to have a connection who gave us some really good advice. So I wanted to get Billy some help, but this person that we know, who is a child psychologist, explained to us that what actually needed to happen was that my husband and I needed to talk to somebody to be able to give us help to help Billy. So we are fortunate and privileged enough to be able to, we were able to afford a session with a child psychologist, which really, really helped me. Especially, I think I was the one that was tending to have all of these conversations with Billy to try and get out of him what was the matter, and to try and allow him and give him space and hold space for him to have these conversations. Whereas I think my husband was a bit more action focused and would try to distract him or would try to encourage him to do other things and not think about it. Whereas I was the person that inevitably would go to bed at the same time as him, and then we'd end up having a conversation for an hour about all of this stuff that was just going round and round in his head.
Advice would you give to any other parent listening who may come across this in the future, who may have a child who tells them that they've seen something on the internet that has really, really perturbed them, and that, the content is particularly disturbing? What advice would you give to them to help their child process what they've seen?
Let them talk about it. Don't try and brush it under the carpet. I think that's probably what we tried to do in the beginning, but give them the space to be able to process what they've seen or what they've heard, and get some help for yourself as well, so that you're able to use different tools that maybe you haven't thought about to be able to support your child that's gone through this, because I'm sure it's much more common than we think it is.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
I'm a transformation director with 15 years experience helping businesses make major change. I bring a deep understanding of problem solving, trend analysis and stakeholder engagement. I'm able to operate at both executive and team level. I'm personable and pragmatic with a huge passion for my work.
Pregnancy and maternity discrimination shreds the careers of 74,000 women every year. At Pregnant Then Screwed, we can stop it. Visit careershredder.com to show your support.
Hello everyone, today we are joined by Sarah Clark, or Sarah with the blue hair as she is better known, who is a child and adolescent psychotherapist living and working in the North East. She's spent the last 30 years working in private, state and specialist school settings in one capacity or another, all over England and abroad, and she's also a single mum of two utterly gorgeous daughters aged 18 and 15, so she definitely comes with lots lots of experience of looking after teenagers as well. So Sarah, we would love to talk to you about some of the themes that are coming out of adolescence and that lots of people are panicking over. And also there seems to be this sort of, I've seen this rhetoric coming out from it that feels quite divisive about what is happening to our teenagers. So I guess my first question is, how worried should we be?
I think we should be worried. And I think I would have said that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I'll say that 10 years in the future, because being worried about our kids is what good parenting looks like.
So do you think that we have an extra layer of worry because of the internet? Do you think social media and the things that they potentially are accessing online is causing damage to our children?
I think it makes it more complicated, because I think really teenagers, children fundamentally need two things. They need good relationships, and within the relationships, they need good communication. And the problem with the internet is that it detracts from both of those two things. And the best form of communication is one-to-one, face-to-face, like we're doing now. And the minute you start messaging, you lose tone of voice, you lose nuance, you lose context, you lose all that non-verbal communication. So that then detracts from the relationship. So if communication relationships are fundamental to helping our children grow up in this world, we're taking away from both of those two things every time we put them in front of a screen.
So you would say the big worry is not necessarily what they're accessing online, but the deterioration in real life relationships in favor of online relationships. That's the biggest issue that you're seeing.
Exactly that. As human beings, we're hardwired to be relational. That's what everybody wants. The difficulty with teenagers in particular is that they can give all the sign that they don't want to be in a relationship with you, particularly if you're their parents. They're designed to start separating from their parents and move towards their peer group. So all the signals that they give off are around, I don't want to talk to you, silence, slamming of doors, disappearing off to bedrooms. But it's actually a bit of a trick, because their other relationships are so confusing that now is the time they need us most to walk alongside them and help them navigate those.
And Sarah, is it a bit of both? Is it a bit of more access to social media and screens? Do you think also parents are pulling back more than previous generations, or is it just that we're thinking about it more now?
Maybe both, because it's easier to pull back the idea of the digital babysitter. And let's be really honest, we can't put all the blame on the teenagers. How many parents, a teenager starts to tell you something and then your phone goes or an email comes in or a work call and we're distracted. So it's happening on both sides. I don't think we can put all the blame on the teenagers. I think that computers and digital interfacing is getting in the way of everybody.
So what advice would you give to any parents that are listening right now and are worried about their child and their distance from their friends, their distance from them as their parents, and perhaps they're staying in their room a lot more and they're on their computers and their screens a lot more? What advice would you give them?
To be in fierce competition with the internet. I feel like that's our challenge. That's the challenge of the modern world, to encourage children to have parties, sleepovers, friends round for tea. Do you remember when we used to have friends round for tea? And I feel like kids don't need that anymore because they've got their friends on their phone, but friends round for tea is so important. And I think what the documentary really showed us in the final episode was the parents' absolute distress, saying he was in his room, we thought he was safe, but the minute kids are in their rooms and the doors are closed, we don't know that they're safe anymore. And it's about knocking on the door and asking to come in, come into their room, come into their world, come into their life, come into their relationships, and ask if they need a hand with that.
Can I just say, I love that you called it tea as well. So for any Southerners listening, that's dinner
or supper.
Tea.
I picked up on that as well, and I was like, literally a cup of tea.
And we call lunch dinner and dinner tea, just to translate. I used to love going around to my friend's house for tea. And we did it almost every night after school. You'd be at a different person's house, wouldn't you? I remember my friend's dad, when you asked him for ketchup, he used to go, "When you finished your tea," as if like you had to finish your dinner before you got your ketchup. And I feel like that is missing. You're absolutely right. But I also find a reluctance with my children to do more socializing. They're so addicted to games and to screens that that's always their preference. And so encouraging them to go to a friend's house, to play out, to do things in real life feels quite difficult. Would you say just turn those screens off and force them to socialize?
Yeah, that's really hard to do, isn't it? I think there's something about be the parent who offers, be the parent who invites, be the parent who, dare I say it, has the parties at your house, which I've done, radiators pulled off walls, you know, but ultimately I had 30 kids in my house and they were all being together mostly in person. And that's what I really want. Role model it. You know, I mean, again, if you want a throwback, what about dinner parties? You know, that was the adult form of going for tea with somebody, wasn't it? And I feel like we don't do that anymore. So role model being out with your friends, having your friends round, having conversations rather than just texting, because we know that children do what we do rather than do what we say. So if you want them off their phones, don't be on your phones all the time.
And what I'm hearing is that we have to work a bit harder. I think it's so easy to be addicted ourselves. I'm definitely addicted to social media, like Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time. And I'm so conscious of my daughters looking at me when I'm with them and I'm on my phone. Would you say it's like we as parents have to look at our addiction as well to manage our child's addiction?
Yeah, definitely. And create those phone-free zones. So we've always had a rule in our house that there are no phones at the dinner table. And even just saying that, I'm really aware that there are still lots of families that don't do the family dinner time. Every member of the family around the table, no phones around. What did you do today? How was your day? Reminding and teaching our children to be curious about our lives, you know, ask how my day was. Let me tell you about my challenges. I feel like in there is another really important thing, which is the idea of role modeling mistakes, you know, and things going wrong and things going badly and how we as adults manage that. So the only way that teenagers are going to talk to us about things that are difficult or things that are challenging for them is if we do the same for them and explain, oh, I've had an argument with a friend and I need to find a way to resolve it, or this terrible thing happened at work today and I'm trying to work out the best way to get round it, because there's a lot to do with perfection and the idea that they need to be right and all these hideous role modeling what being manly or masculine or even just an adult looks like, and it's never about their mistakes.
In the second episode of To Be a Boy, we spoke to Ruth Whitman, who's the author of Boy Mom, and she talked to us about brain development of boys and how actually they tend to be more fragile and more sensitive. What do you think boys need right now to be able to deal with everything that they're able to access and to deal with the modern world?
Yeah, and going back to what I said earlier, if anything, boys need more help with communication. We know that it's harder for boys to make and maintain friendships and to talk in friendships about problems, difficulties, to admit vulnerability, to admit that they've got things wrong. That idea of boys being really sensitive and needing more nurture as babies, I think continues into adolescence, because just because of the patriarchy in society expecting them to be tougher, braver, more resilient, and they're not, and they need just as much help, if not more help, than girls. And the society is almost set up for girls. If we look at counselling and therapy, we get lots of boys referred at primary school for acting out, but by the time we get to secondary school, it's more girls who are coming to therapy, staying in therapy. And I think it's still perceived as a weakness for boys to be getting that kind of help, and actually it's the boys who really need it. If we look at male suicide rates, I know you've talked about that before, men have difficulty in getting support for their mental health. We need more men in schools, we need more male therapists and more ways to help boys access talking about their feelings.
And Sarah, can you talk a little bit about the wider risk factors as well? I felt like in Adolescence, Jamie's character and the family were a normal family, which I think was important to show this could happen to anyone. But we know there are wider risk factors that can maybe drive boys to harmful online content, that can engage them in negative behaviors. So what would you say are those wider kind of risk factors that you see from boys as well?
Yeah, any kind of marginalization, I think, you know, boys of color, boys who come from families with poverty in it. We're seeing hundreds and thousands of young men and boys in our caseloads who are presenting with autism and ADHD, other neurodiversity, other sorts of psychological difficulties. That's all plays a part, because for some of those children, actually the online world feels a lot safer than interpersonal relationships with other human beings. So it's even easier for them to retreat into those kind of worlds, and even easier for parents who are struggling maybe with a neurodiverse child to allow them to do it, because it's hard work.
Yeah. And do you think, because I know parents with neurodiverse children who say the school system, it just isn't working for them at all, and so some are homeschooled, and so I guess as well there's that extra factor of they're out of the school system, it's harder then to socialise with people, so they're more likely to find friends online as well. So it's sort of a knock-on effect of the fact that the school system isn't fully catering to neurodiverse children in many cases.
School system doesn't cater for so many children, and interestingly, in my opinion, having taught for 30 years, it really doesn't cater for boys. You know, it's too much sitting down, sitting still, and going back to your episode 2 when we were talking about being rambunctious and physical, and that's actually a way that boys are and need to be. You know, I've worked in special educational needs, and one of my sanctions used to be to get boys to run around the field, just because being able to exert themselves physically was a way of helping them regulate, helping them calm down, which we go back to adolescence. A lot of what we're talking about is male anger, male rage, and finding an outlet for that. Being physical is one of those ways, and the school system just has them sitting down for hours and hours on end, keeping still, keeping quiet.
Sarah, from your work and seeing Adolescence, what was your emotion watching it? Were you surprised? Were you just happy that finally these issues were given a mainstream platform? Is there anything in there that you thought actually that isn't a true representation of what you've seen from your work?
I think my overall summary of it was very, I sound like a typical mum. I wasn't angry with it. I was just a bit disappointed. I think I had huge expectations. I love adolescence. It's one of my favourite topics. And I know that it's a really multi-layered, complex, nuanced topic. But I think I was hoping for a bit more. It left me almost with more questions than answers. It left me feeling quite despairing. It didn't seem that there was much in there to give parents hope. It certainly didn't seem that there was much signposting or modelling of what parenting, communication, relationships could and should look like. Maybe my expectations were too high or too professional, but it's a problem. It's something that we as a profession are enormously worried about, but we often feel like we're shouting into the void about it.
What gives you hope, Sarah, Bluehead Sarah, about boys and just the future more generally?
I think what gives me hope is that I know so many lovely boys and wonderful men who really want to do better at this. So if there's one thing that we can do to help our problem with men and boys, it's other men and boys. That's what we really need. They don't need angry bluehead psychotherapists blaming and shaming them for getting things wrong all the time. They need lovely, warm, compassionate men. There's been loads of stuff in the news today about Gareth Southgate, you know, who's just the most amazing male role model. We need men like him to stand up and speak on behalf of men, because men will listen to other men. We need male teachers, we need male therapists, we need men to step up and help other men, bring them on board, empower them, make them feel worthy and valuable.
Lovely, thank you. One more question. What advice would you give to a parent who really wants their son to talk to them, who just wants their son to open up more and feels that they're putting up a brick wall?
Sometimes that little fraction of a plea for help is really small and it can go so easily unnoticed. It's about being aware and waiting for that door, literally or metaphorically, to open, even just a crack. And when it does, and in my experience, it's often at the most inconvenient times, you know, it's when I come home late from work, it's when I'm really tired, it's when I've had a horrendous day myself. That's 9 times out of 10 when my teenager wants to talk to me. And there's something about just looking for that tiny opening of the door and then seizing it. And when you do, using it to really listen, using it to be empathic, and using it to say, this has been so nice to talk to you, let's do it again.
I love that.
Sarah, sometimes a lot of us parents, we question ourselves and we question whether we're doing the right thing, the wrong thing, and we can be really harsh on ourselves and give ourselves a bad performance review. Some positivity. How do you think we should be looking at ourselves in regards to our approach to parenting? Can we be kinder to ourselves to know that we are doing the right thing sometimes?
I think we can. And I think the most moving scene in Adolescence is the tears shed by the dad in the final episode when he thinks about how wrong he's got it, or he reflects on that. I get a lot of strength from the idea of Donald Winnicott, who talks about what being a good enough parent looks like. So he says we need to get it right a third of the time. That can be a little bit intimidating, but it's only a third. We're allowed to get it wrong a third of the time. I find that so reassuring that we can actually make mistakes and get it completely wrong as a parent a third of the time. And then the crucial third is that last third where we are wondering about what we've done. It's the conversations you have with your partner where you say, do you think I was too hard on him this evening? I wonder if we need to find her some help with this. It's where you read parenting books. It's where you listen to parenting podcasts and you get help and advice and you think it through. And if you add the wondering third together with the good third, you've got the good enough parent. And that feels achievable, realistic for me.
So if you listen to Be a Boy, you're a good parent, basically.
That's it, yeah.
Well
It's
done.
for everyone. Signed
Tick,
off by the
you're doing fine. You're listening to the podcast, you're good.
And that's all you need to do. Just
That's
listen
what you need to do.
Be a Boy constantly and you're on it. Thank you, Sarah. That was so insightful and helpful. We're really grateful to you for taking the time to come on. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
So, Elliott, you very luckily have your parents close by and they do quite a bit of childcare for you, but they go to Grenada for 3 months every year. What do you do when they're gone? How do you look after yourself and your relationship?
Well, I feel very sorry for myself. Going to Grenada is amazing for them, but it's not so great for us. Luckily, we have Bubble. Bubble provides us with emergency childcare, backup childcare, and ultimately the opportunity for us to have date nights and also go to the spa every now and again. Because us parents, we need to maintain our identity. We need to maintain our self-care and our relationships. So Bubble is incredible for when my parents jet off to Grenada.
Find and book background checked nannies and sitters who can be with you in as little as an hour. Trusted by parents you know. Like us, search Bubble Childcare in the App Store or Google Play Store.
Ineke Houtenbos is a senior safeguarding training consultant for the NSPCC. She designs and delivers training to a wide range of organizations to support them in safeguarding children and young people. She previously worked in juvenile justice and care settings in Northern Ireland and the United States, and as a social worker in the Netherlands. She's been a supervisor at Childline, engaging with children at risk. She's based in Northern Ireland, working across the UK and internationally. So it's just gone St. Patrick's Day. We are delighted you could fit us in. And we're so keen to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be asked to come and speak with you folks today.
So you've got loads of professional expertise and we're really interested to hear from you in regards to the impact you are seeing on boys from the influence of online misogynistic influencers, the manosphere, harmful content and porn. What are you seeing from your work?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that there's a variety of impacts, and it's really not just impacting on boys. It's impacting on all of us because boys and girls are part of our society. Now I know that my language is using that is very binary, but just for the purposes of this conversation, I think it's important to kind of do that. But boys are not necessarily seeking this information out. They're very much maybe just being online, catching a video, and then the algorithm starts pushing it. And then they're not quite sure what to do with it. And then it can kind of go a number of different ways. Some of those boys might be interested in that. It might be aligning a little bit with what they're seeing in their daily lives or what they're hearing from their friends. And some boys might be really rejecting it, but then are in a tough situation because other boys might be talking about this. And as an adolescent, part of growing up is trying to fit in, right? So that can make it very, very difficult to navigate that space and kind of have a very staunch stance on that and kind of say, no, I'm not going to engage with that. Because again, they're just kids. Yeah, we forget that sometimes. And then obviously there's then that knock-on impact on girls and how boys are engaging with young girls, for example. And there was some research done by Vodafone, actually in February or this year. And they were saying that, I'm just looking at my notes here, they've got 69% of boys have been exposed to online content that promotes misogyny. And over half of them are aware and have engaged with the content from influencers with ties to the manosphere. And 59% of those boys were led to this content through innocent searches. So they weren't even looking for it. It just kind of popped up. And then 1 in 5 parents said that they had noticed a gradual change in their young person's kind of language and demeanor. And this was the one that kind of really blew me away, was that 70% of teachers are seeing an increase in kind of sexist language in the classroom. So we're kind of seeing that the impact, as always, is a lot wider than just that boy who's seeing that content online.
Yeah, and it's really interesting where you say the boys aren't necessarily looking for it, but it's presented to them. What would you say in terms of, for parents, how can they go about safeguarding their kids? Are there effective ways of ensuring or hoping or, you know, steps to take to limit the exposure of this content to our children?
It kind of starts with, we talk a lot about this within professional settings. We talk about a safeguarding culture, right? But that exists at home too. And I think it's about creating an environment where we talk about things that are difficult. And what does that look like? While I was working in Childline, for example, a lot of kids, it's very raw, right? Because they're calling us and we don't know anything about them. We have no idea what's coming. They've just decided to pick up the phone and talk. And we will always ask them, like, well, have you tried talking to your mommy or daddy about this? Like, and then they'll say, no, they'll never understand because I don't ever see them having problems, right? And it really taught me something as a mom, that it's important to show children and to model behavior around problems that you might be having, obviously within reason, right? But kind of say, oh, I had this confrontation today. What do you think about that? I'm not quite sure what to do with that. And so engaging them in like, well, what do you think? And is this the right thing to say? Is that the right thing to do? Because then you're modeling, if I have a problem, the thing to do is to talk about it. Right. And then you're creating that environment, that safeguarding culture within your home to kind of say, yeah, there's stuff out there that's uncomfortable, but we're going to talk about it. And one of the things I very often say is that if we don't talk about it with our children, somebody on the internet will.
Yeah.
For sure. So we have to constantly be that one step ahead, which is difficult because a lot of us, you know, I was born and raised in the 70s. The only thing I had to worry about, or my parents had to worry about, was like, don't go to that neighborhood. It's dodgy. That's it. You know, be home before night. And now parents have to navigate that part of it, but also what's happening online and what do I understand about what's happening online? So there's lots to that, but it takes a little bit more time, which is difficult for us because we don't always have that time. But we need to make it. We need to sit down with our young people and go, what's that? What does that mean? Why is that funny? I don't get it. You know, that creates that sense of, yeah, I can talk about this if I need to.
And is there practical things around online safety, around different apps, around access? So my daughter she's only 9 and she has Roblox, and she's got her own laptop. Every time she downloads something, it sends a notification to my phone or my wife's phone. And the other day she downloaded a game on PlayStation and I was like, why did you download Fortnite? And she was like, oh, I forget you get the emails. But it's a good way of us controlling, I guess, what she's downloading. But what would you say in terms of that kind of stuff, like the practical tools that we can use to actually monitor, have a look at what they're accessing?
Yeah, it's like anything, you know, if you don't know how to use the tools at your disposal, they're not going to work. So you need to do that research and see what makes sense, but also what makes sense for my child. And it also can depend on their age. It can also depend on, you know, neurodivergency. Some young people who are neurodivergent respond very well, and social media and apps like YouTube, for example, can provide content that is very soothing to them. So you might have to deal with that very differently for that child as opposed to a young person who's maybe a little bit older, who's not, you know, on the spectrum or anything like that, and their level of understanding. So again, it's about how well do I know my child and what makes sense for us. But ultimately, knowing that, you know, you can contact your internet provider and let them know that the device is for a child, you know, that might lock some stuff down. You can get, you know, filters on your phones. You can get blocks on your phones. Like a lot of these apps, you know, they're 13 plus. So it's again about educating yourself about what these platforms are, how children can use them, We're by no means saying that, kids shouldn't have phones or, shouldn't be on social media, because that's just not the world that we live in. But it's about us as parents being very, very proactive in thinking, what parameters do I need to put in for my child, not just technologically, but also in terms of that conversation. What are you looking at? How long are you looking at it? Because some of those apps, like you were saying, Elliot, they can tell you that, you've been on TikTok for 20 hours. That may or may not be a personal statement from me. You have those things that are available to you, but then use them. Talk to your child about that and talk about why those boundaries are so important. Because that's ultimately our job too, as parents.
Yeah, of course. What my kids, my partner is in charge of the IT in the house, right? Because I'm a feminist, but there are jobs that are his. Take the bins out, you deal with the tech. And we thought all of our technology was locked down. It had full parental controls over it. We were really confident. And somebody said, try Googling. And I'm not going to say the name of the website, but a website, pornography website. Try Googling it and see if you can get into it. And I did. And I got straight in. And since then I've been to friends' houses and talked to them about it. And they'd say, oh no, we're completely locked down. There's no way my kids could get on anything. And I say, try Googling this website. And they Google it and they get straight in. And it's a horrible website with very dark things on it. What would you say parents should be checking to? Do you think, firstly, would you encourage parents to do that, to do their own checking to see if they can get into certain websites themselves? I will say actually as well, at the school my eldest goes to, somebody in his class said, try Googling 69. And they did. And they, again, saw content relating to not the numerical 69, shall we say.
I got
and that was at the school where they obviously believe they have everything completely locked down. Ultimately, it's left me feeling very uncertain that you can never completely lock a device down and that you can never keep your kids completely safe from seeing that sort of content. What advice would you give?
Definitely that. Don't be complacent. There is, algorithms, and the online world is changing all the time, sometimes while you're looking at it, right? So there's that element of nothing is 100%. And that's a really scary place to be as a parent. But, kids walking down the street isn't always 100% safe. Yeah. Equally, being online is not always 100% safe. Exactly that example that you've given. And how do you use filters? Like what we noticed as well for children who were accessing Childline, for example, they couldn't access Childline at home, so they were accessing it at school. But there is reference in Childline around sexual abuse and sexual assault. But because the word sex was banned and the filters in school, they couldn't access it. So now what do we do? Right? So it's about recognizing what tools do we have at our disposal, technologically speaking. Let's use them, but let's not just rely on those things. Let's also create that culture of this stuff is probably not okay. And if you see it, what do you need to do about it? How do you talk to me about that? It's okay to talk to me about that. And that bit about educating yourself around what's around. Language even changes. I don't know if you folks noticed, like I sent something to my daughters because I think I'm hilarious. And they sent like crying emojis. But they said that's what a laughing emoji is now. And I was like, okay. And did that, that's how quickly things change. So it's about having those conversations with your kids and creating an environment where this is what we do. When you're on your phone, I'll give you privacy, but every now and again, I'll be like, who are you talking to? What's happening?
Yeah.
What's going on? Yeah.
And do you think it's okay? My son doesn't have a phone yet, but when he has one, I'm going to say to him, I'm going to do spot checks on you. I'm going to, at any given point, you can only get this phone if at any given point I can take that phone off you and look through who you've been talking to, what you've been saying and what you've been looking at.
Yeah.
Which I have talked with the parents about it, and some are like, oh no, that's too far. You're invading their privacy. But I feel that's the only way I will feel confident with him having any sort of device. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's like with anything, context is everything, right? So if we're explaining that the reason that I'm doing this is because there's stuff around that I don't necessarily want you to have access to. So this isn't about me disrespecting your right to privacy, which you absolutely have. This is my job to keep you safe. I need to understand what's on your phone and what kind of messages you're getting. But again, if we're having those conversations with kids about, who has your phone number? Who do you give your phone number to? Because it's as easy as I've now been put in a group with people that I don't know who now can all see my phone number.
Yeah.
Right. So that happens all the time. And it sometimes happens, without your permission. So how do we change those settings? How do we make sure that kids are talking to us saying, I'm in a group chat now, but I can see everybody's numbers. I don't want them to see mine. Educate yourself about how we can take that off. But obviously those aren't the only sites. You could have gaming sites, for example, about how do I put in those controls there? Because again, we might think my kid's upstairs playing a video game. They're maybe not doing that on their own, right? Who's literally in that room with my child right now?
Yeah.
How are they speaking to them? Take that time. It doesn't always have to be like a formal thing, come into their room with a cup of tea and get, what are you playing? Who's playing? Yeah. What are we talking about? Can I hear? It's about inserting yourself in your child's life, which is really difficult for teenagers because the whole point of being a teenager is you're finding your own way. You're finding where you fit in with your clothes, with your language, with your music. You're finding who you are, and you need that chance to kind of extricate yourself from that family dynamic, which is natural and normal and proper and healthy. But there's that aspect of you're still also a child and my responsibility.
I love that advice because I feel like as a society, we haven't necessarily been told to do that so much. I posted today on my LinkedIn about limiting screen time. And I had a message from a dad who said, I love your work. I love what you talk about. But I sent this to my wife and she said that limiting screen time thing feels like we're taking power away from our children. And it feels like we are discouraging trust. And I kind of went back and said, look, of course, we need to lead with trust and openness, but at the same time, we're still their parents and there still needs to be boundaries and we still need to be okay with telling them to do things that they may not like to hear, but we know are good for them. What are your views on like limiting screen time? For example, you can't take your phone to bed, no phones at the dinner table, etc. Like what were your views on parents doing that?
I think it kind of goes back. My research tells us that, that kids get stuck online watching, social media and it's designed to keep you there. That's why it's so addictive. So how do we help them manage that impulse? How do we help them do that? And, you can try different things. You can say, let's make a deal. You're not going to be online after 10, depending on age. Yeah, whatever time. And if they're able to do that, we're good. If they're not, you're breaking a boundary and a rule that I've given you. So now I'm going to take your phone away at 10 and you'll get it back in the morning. And it's about helping them regulate themselves as well within an online world, which is really difficult for us as parents. How many times do we get stuck scrolling? And then 2 hours later, you're like, oh, okay, what? That's what it's designed to do. So again, being honest about that and having conversations about that's not healthy because you need to sleep and you need to do other things. And my personal opinion, again, creating that safeguarding culture within our family is we don't have our phones on the dinner table.
I had my barnet done yesterday. Now this is relevant.
Gorgeous.
I'm not just showing off. And my hairdresser, who is brilliant, and he's in his 20s. He has a baby on the way. I talked to him about adolescence and asked him his thoughts on it. And we ended up getting into a really good conversation. He had grown up with screens. I hadn't. And I asked him what he'd seen when he was younger that was violent, horrific content. And he said as soon as he went to secondary school, so year 7, he was exposed to all sorts of horrible stuff, like really horrible stuff. ISIS beheadings, really graphic, violent porn. And he said, I saw it, but I just went, oh, well, that's horrible. And he said, yeah, it made me feel sick. But I just rejected it. I just was like, well, I don't want to look at that. That's just awful. Why would I want to look at that? So he saw it, felt sick, moved on. And he said it didn't damage him at all, because he was like, I know the difference between right and wrong. And I know that that's just not very nice. I said, did you speak to your parents about it? He said, of course I didn't. I said, did you speak to friends about it and how it had made you feel? He said, no, of course I didn't. I just absorbed it, felt sick about it, and moved forward. And I found it very reassuring, because I think after watching Adolescence, we can all be really terrified that once our kids have seen something really disturbing, that it's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. And actually his message to me was, no, that's not the case. But he was very careful to say, but I didn't grow up with Andrew Tate and the Manosphere.
Yeah.
The incel groups were not part of my youth. It was just really graphic, horrible content that I was exposed to.
Yeah.
And it does feel to me there is a difference between kids seeing these disgusting things on the internet and then being brainwashed by the likes of these incel groups and the Manosphere.
Yeah. And there's a process there too, right? Because if a young person sees something very graphic, that shock factor could put them off. But it's those gradual little things that they're hearing here and there where their boundaries are starting to crumble a little bit. You know, their friends talk about women in a certain way and they think it's funny. Oh, you know, somebody maybe in their family says something rude about, you know, a woman or describes a woman in a certain way. They're picking up on all of these little signals. And I think that we forget that sometimes with teenagers, because, you know, they're sometimes, you know, bigger than we are. They're walking around and you think that they're adults, and they're not. They're still children. They're still sponges. Their brains are processing everything all the time, all the messages. And again, part of the adolescent brain is figuring out, what does the world look like and what is my place in it, right? And if you don't have a secure base, then you will try to find somewhere where you belong. You're going to try and find somewhere where you feel seen and supported. And there is that insecurity. Again, natural, normal part of being an adolescent is that you're going to feel insecure. You're going to think you look weird. You're going to think you're not the prettiest. You're going to think you're not the muscliest, all of those things. And if there's nothing on the other side in terms of your family and your environment supporting you, saying, no, we love you. We want to hear what's going on for you. We're interested in you. You know, we're interested in your dreams. Not every child has that. So they're going to look for something where they might feel seen and they might feel heard. And it's just so difficult. And we saw in that show, Adolescence, they were lovely people. They were just parents, you know, doing their best, working hard. It's a difficult space to navigate. But as I said earlier, if we don't talk to our kids about it, somebody on the internet will.
So Ineke, if at the beginning you said parents are seeing the impact on their children, they're acting differently, their sons having different views, maybe being a bit more reclusive, what should they do? What happens? They've already seen the content. We think they're being influenced by these influences, these incel groups. What next? What would your advice be for parents to do?
Yeah. And some of those signs can be about, you know, as you said, withdrawing. They're on their phone even more. They're secretive around being on their phone. But equally, they can be really excited and really happy, right? So all of a sudden, their life is amazing. And we love to see that, of course. But it's like, what flipped that switch, right? So any kind of change in the child's behavior, significant change in the child's behavior, we need to clock in on that. Yeah, that necessitates us really understanding our children, though, right? Because now this is not normal for you, and I can see this is not normal for you. So a really important thing, as most of us know, is stay calm. Might not feel calm, but we're going to fake it till we make it. And we're going to freak out with our friends. We're going to freak out with our partner. But right now, with my child, I am calm as the deep blue sea. And we're just going to be like, what did you mean by that? Where did you hear that? Okay, that's interesting. Does that make sense to you? Just have that conversation. And very often having that conversation does not mean sitting down with the child. We often hear that, don't we, in advice from different sources, like sit down with your child and talk to them about it. The best way to shut down a conversation with a child is sit down with them face to face. They will not talk to you. They won't. Do something. Or we're going to go for a drive. Want to get some chicken nuggets? Awesome. Let's go. You know what you said the other day about that thing? I've been thinking about it. Yeah. And you're both kind of sitting in the car traveling along, or you're doing something, you're playing pool or you're fishing. I don't know. You're giving space to the thing that's freaking you out, to the child, in a way that is safe and accessible for them. Because your child might not in that moment be prepared to say anything, but they will have heard you. Because the message here is you're interested, you care about me, and you noticed. And they might need a little bit of time to percolate on it. Give them that time and then come back to it. But definitely help them open up in that way by creating that environment where we can talk about things. And also knowing where to get help for them. So you might not want to talk to me, but you can call Childline or have you talk to your friends about it. So again, it's about opening up that conversation and the possibility of that conversation. And also being educated yourself. Know what the manosphere is. Understand what misogyny looks like. Understand where else that child might see that in the family or in their environment, right? And address it. So calling them out if they're saying something or they're making comments about women in a certain way. And it can be very powerful as well that challenge comes from an important male figure in their life. Like, whoa, what was that? Where did that come from?
My eldest heard that statistic, the Channel 4 research about Gen Z and whether they think feminism has gone too far. It was something like 48% of Gen Z boys think feminism has gone too far, and now boys are experiencing sexism. And he heard it on the radio and he said to me, I agree with that. And so we had a conversation about it, but I posted about it and said, what would you do in that scenario? Lots and lots of people said to me, I would have sat down with him and explained the patriarchy and explained the history of women's fight for equality. And to me, that didn't feel like the right solution, because actually screaming patriarchy in his face when he was telling me something that was his experience of the world felt like the opposite of what I should be doing. And even though I am a staunch feminist who spent the last 10 years fighting for women's rights, so it's really hard for me not to do that. Instead, I asked him what he meant and asked him to elaborate on where that had come from and empathize with what he was saying, because actually that is what he was saying is his real experience. Me telling him that that's not true would be counterproductive to me. What would you say parents should do in that?
Yeah,
situation?
I totally agree with that. I always try to put myself in the situation. If somebody was talking to me like I'm planning to talk to you right now, how would I respond? Am I going to shut it down or am I going to engage with it? And it's so important for children to hear that their experience is valid and something that they are allowed to talk about. Whether we agree or not about it is like phase 2, right? First, we're going to let them know that I hear you. Help me understand what that means. Help me understand what that looks like for you. And how does that leave you feeling? And some kids will be able to go into that level of emotional detail and talk about it, and some kids won't. And then we can start teaching them. I think that there's definitely a place for teaching children about the world, how it's worked, why it is the way it is. But it's about timing. Everything. Time is everything. Yeah. If you're stuck in your feelings and you're really hurt and sad about something, you don't want to hear the theoretical explanation about why that might be. You want to have somebody say, okay, I hear you. And again, that opens up conversations, that creates an environment where we talk about this kind of stuff.
Powerful conversation. Thank you so much. From a NSPCC perspective, what are you doing to support parents and support children? Is there anything that we should be plugging into? What's going on there? Talk to us about NSPCC and how you're supporting parents and children.
So NSPCC has a lot of different elements to it. So we have pages on nspcc.org that you can access for information about this. And we've got content on talking to your children about like fake news, hoaxes, scams, things like that, but also how to keep yourself safe online. We have some content as well around, the manosphere and the impact that has on children. We also have our helplines. So we have an adult helpline, which you can call, which parents have done, for advice. It's a helpline that people can call if they have a concern about a child. They see something in the neighborhood that they're not quite comfortable with, or if you're a professional and you have a concern about a child and you just need some advice. But we have had parents call us and say, listen, my son is talking about Andrew Tate and has been expressing really kind of shocking language, and I just don't know what to do. Yeah. So you can contact that helpline. You can also contact Childline as a child to talk about things that are worrying you. So Childline does have an confidentiality policy, so we don't report anything that you say. So you can call us anonymously if a child needs to ever talk to us about anything that's on their mind.
This is so valuable. I mean, honestly, this is so. I really, when I was younger, Childline was a threat that I'd use against my parents. I'm calling Childline. I've had enough. But actually, this is so needed, isn't it, right now? And I have actually used your help email, not the advice line. I sent an email to NSPCC because of a child that I was worried about that I knew.
Thank you.
The advice was just incredible, so thoughtful, the person responding put so much thought and effort into it. I was so impressed, and it was really unexpected.
Yeah.
So, I mean, thank you for it existing, like really such a valuable service.
I'm so lucky. I kind of pinch myself every day to think that I'm actually working for this organization. And what I love about my organization is that it always asks us as staff to be brave, which is something that just spoke to my heart in terms of where do I want to work? Where do I want to do this work? And it's with NSPCC because they ask us to be brave and stand up for children. And we work very, very hard with other organizations to ensure that we're always, evidence-based, that we're always coming from a place of, we know this because the stats are telling us, we know this because kids are telling us, and that's why things need to change. And then we also have been working with Vodafone to create a toolkit that people can access as well, either on the NSPCC website or on the Vodafone website. There's loads of resources on our nspcc.org website, but we also have an NSPCC Learning website, which has podcasts, research papers, but it will also give you access to training that you might be interested in, or consultancy for organizations that are working with children and young people to kind of get, their policies right, or if they need any training around safeguarding children.
You've been brilliant. Thank you so much, Ineke. I really appreciate you.
I've enjoyed myself a lot. Thank you.
And we're going to link all of those resources in the show notes as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
What an episode. What an episode. Adolescence is a phenomenal show. And I've enjoyed this episode so much. We chewed the fat. We gave our reflections on the show. We spoke to Sarah, not her real name, the mother who spoke about her child and her experiences. Thank you so much. That was powerful. Sarah, blue-haired Sarah, our psychologist, spoke about the impact on children. And then we finished with Ineke from the NSPCC giving us some real practical advice and takeaways. It's been incredible. We want to hear your views. Please email us tobeaboyteam@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought about the show, what you thought about our reflections, our guests, this episode. Thank you so much for sticking with us. To Be a Boy podcast, signing out.
See you later.